Okay, now when we come to Colossians 1:15, when Jesus is said to be firstborn of all creation, now we have to determine, what does it mean? Does it mean the first one born, the first one created, the heir, and the one who's preeminent? What definition of firstborn would apply to Christ in the context? You don't need to guess. Paul goes on to tell you in the very next verse, but here, let me post it. Colossians 1:15-17. There are three meanings to firstborn. Okay, you ready? Three meanings to firstborn, right? One, the one born first. Two, the heir. Three, the one who is preeminent, has preeminence. Now, where do I get this from? I get it from the Bible. Not every use of firstborn means the one born first. There are times in which the word is used to refer to a person's status as being supreme or to his role as the heir, without this referring to him being born first. Firstborn in those contexts mean the one who is supreme, has supremacy, he's preeminent, right? And or the heir. Okay, let me give you an example where the word firstborn is used in two different ways in the same context. Two different ways. Jacob had 12 sons. Jacob, who became Israel, had 12 sons. His firstborn was Reuben, the one born first. His 11th son was Joseph. Joseph was son number 11. Reuben was the firstborn. You got to make sure you get this. Okay. If you got it, 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1-3. 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1-3. If you get it, let's see. Reuben is the son born first, so he's firstborn in order, in terms of chronology. But he's not firstborn in terms of status and inheritance. Because notice what 1 Chronicles 5, 1-3 is going to say. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel. Now watch what it says. For he was the firstborn, because he's the one born first. But for as much as he defiled his father's bed, Joseph was given the status of firstborn, in that Joseph became preeminent over all his brothers, and he was given the inheritance, which is why Jacob gave him a double portion. Joseph, son number 11, is firstborn in terms of status. He's now preeminent. He holds supremacy over all his brothers, and he was the heir. You catch it? So do you see how firstborn can mean different things depending on the context? Okay, let me give you another example where firstborn doesn't mean the one born first. Psalm 89, verses 26-27. Watch here. What does God say about David? Pay attention. Also, I will make David, him, my firstborn, higher than the kings of the earth. Notice, God says, I'm going to make David my firstborn. But hold on. David wasn't the firstborn son. He was the youngest of 8 sons born to Jesse. That's 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel chapter 16 says, David was the youngest of 8 sons. He was not the firstborn. Nor was he the first king of Israel, because Saul was king before him. So in what sense could David be the firstborn of anything when he's not the first son born in his family, and he's not the first king of the world? He's not even the first king of Israel. Saul was king before him. So what does it mean? What does it mean for him to be made God's firstborn? What does it mean? Can't mean chronology in terms of time. Can't mean that David was the first one born to his father's household. He was the youngest of 8 sons. Can't mean the first king. Think about it. It's right in front of you. It's there. He is firstborn in terms of rank. He is preeminent, supreme, over all the kings of the earth. He's higher than them in status and glory and honor, because he's God's king. So he has supremacy over them. So notice, firstborn here does not mean David is the first king or the first one born. So those definitions do not apply. So David is not the first one born. That definition doesn't apply. He's not the first king of Israel. That definition doesn't apply. But he is the one who is supreme, preeminent, and the one whom God will give the nations as an inheritance. Okay, now when we come to Colossians 1:15, when Jesus is said to be firstborn of all creation, now we have to determine, what does it mean? Does it mean the first one born, the first one created, the heir, and the one who's preeminent? Or does it mean the one who is preeminent, the one who's the heir, or does it mean preeminent? What definition of firstborn would apply to Christ in the context? You don't need to guess. Paul goes on to tell you in the very next verse. What does Jesus mean? What does it mean for Jesus to be firstborn? Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Now, 16 says, for. See, that word for is telling you what Paul meant. Paul's not going to explain why Jesus is firstborn. That word for is explanatory. It's telling you, here's the reason why Jesus is firstborn. Here's what it means. For by him were all things created. So every creature was created by Christ, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things, not some things, every creature, the entire creation, were created by him and for him. And he is, present tense, before all things. He exists before the entire creation. And by him all things consist. And he sustains the entire creation, all things. Notice that it say most things, many things, or all things. Every creature, the entire creation. All things were created. Were all things created. That are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. And he is, present tense, not was, he is before all things. He is before all creation. And by him all things consist. He sustains the entire creation. All right. Notice what Paul went on to say by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He explains that Jesus is firstborn of every creature for the following reason. God the Father employed Jesus, his Son, to create the entire creation, to create every creature, to create everything in creation, in heaven, on earth, visible and invisible, thrones, powers, dominions. In fact, God the Father used the Son to create all things for the Son, and the Son exists before the entire creation came into being, and it's the Son that sustains all creation. If Christ exists before all things, all creation, and if Christ created all things, can he be part of the entire creation? When he created the entire creation and is before it, both in terms of status and in time? If he exists before the entire creation, he exists before the entire creation, then that means he's not part of creation, he's eternal, right? Because what do you have before all creation came into being? You have eternity. So then how can anyone use Colossians to show that Christ is the first creature when in the context Paul shows that Christ is the agent that God used to create all things that have come into existence? All things everywhere, in heaven, on earth, visible, invisible, thrones, powers, dominions. He did it all. God the Father used him to create all things, which means he exists before all things necessarily. Well, if he exists before all things, then all things are all created things. That means he exists before the entire creation. And therefore, he's not part of creation, not initially, because later on he does become part of creation by becoming man. So that means he's eternal. So then what does it mean for him to be firstborn? Which definition applies in the context? Can't mean the one born first, because he existed before all creation. Right? But then at the last part of 16 it says, everything was created for him. Okay, good. Now let's see. You want proof that it means supremacy, preeminence? Notice, Colossians 1:18, read it with me. And he, Christ, is the head of the body. He, Christ, is the head of the body. Right? The church, who is the beginning. He's the one who started all. He caused it all. Right? Beginning in the sense of causing it all to come into being. The firstborn from the dead. The one who conquered and has preeminence over death. that in all things he might have the preeminence. Bam, right there. There's your definition. In everything, Christ is preeminent, holds supremacy. He is supreme because he's the creator of all creation, the sustainer of all creation, the one who conquered death, the head of the church, and the savior of creation. You do not get more preeminent than that.